Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation about the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. My name is Sue Smerrick. Chris Buffington and I chair the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County Voting Rights Group. This presentation is designed to present information on the history and implementation of this new redistricting process. We're pleased to welcome our two presenters who are both League members. Margaret Leary is the former director of the University of Michigan's Law Library. Since joining the League, she has been active in very many areas. She coordinated the 2020 Census Initiative for our local League. She has also coordinated the Communities of Interest project for this redistricting process for the local League. She has tracked the lawsuits regarding redistricting and is actually one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit the League is sponsoring. She has also been chair of the nominating committee. Currently, she is a team member for collecting signatures for Promote the Vote. Vicki Paulissen has been faculty teaching chemistry at Eastern Michigan University. She worked with Margaret on the Communities of Interest project for redistricting. She's currently active in environmental advocacy for our local League. She's also a team leader for the collection of signatures for the Promote the Vote initiative. Since she presented with John Chamberlain, another League member, about redistricting process at its beginning, it seems only appropriate to have her provide us with new information about how this process has developed. Rather than tell you more about these wonderful League members, let's begin. Vicki?
Thanks, Sue. Thank you all for inviting us this evening to speak about the redistricting process. This is the issue that brought me to the League and when I joined the League. Prior to 2018, I had no idea what redistricting was all about, and Proposal 2 was eye-opening for me. So Margaret and I have followed this process very carefully this past year, and we're happy to share this perspective for you or with you tonight. All right, so we're going to tonight here talk about the formation of the MICRC, that's the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. We'll look at what they did, and we're going to look at the role that the League of Women Voters of the state of Michigan played during this process. We're also, of course, going to be looking at the district maps, and we're going to zero in on Washtenaw County. We have prepared a bit of a report card for the commission, and we're going to pull up the assessments of the performance of the commission that had been put out by various sources. And then we'll follow up with the future of the MICRC. Now, as you probably know, Proposal 2 passed by 61% of the vote in November of 2018. A lot of the credit for this goes to a grassroots group called Voters Not Politicians. And this was formed in 2017 by Katie Fahey, who threw out a request on her Facebook page. She wanted to do something about the gerrymandering in the state of Michigan. She was very successful using social media and gathered a large group of people together. They were very successful in fundraising. And so they hired experts to write Proposal 2. And Proposal 2 is an amendment to the Michigan State Constitution to create this Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. They're very careful to write this amendment so that they would have protections built in for the commission and prevent any interference from legislators or politicians during the process. The group had 4,000 volunteers, collect more than the 425,000 signatures needed, and they did all that in 110 days. They got Proposal 2 on the 2018 ballot. Professional signature gatherers were just astounded how quickly this group collected those signatures and the high percent of validity of the signatures. The night that Proposal 2 passed, Katie Fahey said, the thing we proved tonight is that we are our own saviors. We the people can save ourselves. Personally, I think this should be a motto for the commission. Now, Katie Fahey is no longer with Voters Not Politicians. She's now working in Washington, D.C. And Nancy Wang is now their executive director. Now, the amendment is very detailed. It's more than 3 pages long. We're going to hit the highlights here tonight for you. Technically, the amendment is called Article 4, Section 6 of the Michigan State Constitution. First and foremost, the amendment dictates how the selection of the commissioners must be made, and that it must include 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 5 independents. The amendment also includes a directive of transparency. The commission has had to have all their meetings in public. They have recorded all of those. They are ready for public viewing at their website. This is a dramatic difference from the way redistricting was done in the past, which was behind closed doors by our legislators. Third, of course, the amendment includes a charge for the commission, which is to draw new congressional, state house, and state senate district maps. Those must be drawn following every census, so every 10 years this process is repeated. Fourth, the amendment includes a ranked list of criteria the commissioners must use for drawing the district maps. And we're going to look at those in just a moment. The amendment encourages public participation. The commission is required to have 10 public hearings before any map lines are drawn, and 5 more after the draft maps are published. And they had to have an ongoing process of receiving public comment. The maps must also be tested to ensure compliance with the criteria. It's not enough to say they are. There are ways to test to prove that they are in compliance. A 45-day public comment period begins after the proposed final maps are made. And then final adoption of the maps follows a detailed process outlined in the amendment. It must include a supermajority, which is at least 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 2 independents. And if that's not achieved, there's a detailed process outlined for that. Then finally, the maps become legal 60 days from the date of publishing a report that outlines all the steps and all the metrics that the commissioners used to assemble the maps that they chose. Now, meet your commissioners. You can see a wide variety of ethnicities represented here. We have the youngest member of the commission, Anthony Eade, here. He's a medical school student. He's 28, and he's of Chaldean Lebanese descent. The oldest members of the committee are Steve and Richard here. I believe they're both 73. Juanita over here is close to that. She's 72. We have 2 lawyers on the committee. We have a we have a woman who is a Detroit entrepreneur, runs her own business. We have a domestic engineer. We have a variety here of backgrounds. You can imagine 13 different people. The process of selecting this is extremely detailed in the amendment, and that is for the reason to protect the commissioners from any kind of outside interference. The Secretary of State's office is charged with sending out 250,000 unsolicited applications, and they made the applications also available upon request. This process took place from October of 2019 to June of 2020. The amendment has a long list of qualifications for the commissioners, which include the fact that each commissioner must be a registered voter in the state of Michigan, and also that for 6 years prior to serving on the commission, a commissioner cannot have been a candidate or an elected official or be the officer at any level in political party. They cannot have been an employee or related to employee of the legislator or any kind of lobbying organization. And in addition, the commissioners cannot hold any kind of office for 5 years following the disbanding of the commission. The Secretaries of State office processed over 9,000 applications. They vetted all of those applicants. They, according to the amendment, chose 200 of those at random, though that selection was weighted to represent the demographics of the state of Michigan. And then it got whittled down to these 13 folks. They all come from various regions of the Lower Peninsula. None of the commissioners here come from the Upper Peninsula. So those are your commissioners. Now, they had to follow this list of 7 criteria. They're listed here in order of priority. And first and foremost, the districts that are drawn must comply with federal law, and that includes the Voting Rights Act. Secondly, the districts must be geographically contiguous. So they have to be one area. Third, and this is in red because this is brand new to the state of Michigan. The amendment states that the districts shall reflect the state's diverse population and communities of interest. Now, communities of interest are not well defined in the amendment, and Nancy Wang says that is purposeful. The amendment is to last for decades into the future, and communities of interest may change as the years go on. Generally, though, a community of interest is a group of people that live in a contiguous land mass that share cultural or historical characteristics or economic interest. What ties them together cannot be relationships with political parties or incumbents or candidates. This is where the League of Women Voters really stepped in and tried to inform the public, because it's through being a member of a community interest that you could approach the commissioner, explain what your community was about, where they were located, and why they should be kept together within a specific district. The remaining 4 criteria are here. The amendment states the districts cannot provide disproportionate advantage to any political party. They cannot favor or disfavor any incumbent or candidate. Number 6 is that the district shall reflect consideration of county, city, and township boundaries. And last but not least is that they need to be reasonably compact. Now, what exactly did the commission do? Well, these 13 people had their first meeting during the pandemic. They met virtually. Realized these 13 people never met each other before, and they came from a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences. They first set about establishing their rules of order. They elected a chairperson and a vice chairperson. They determined their salaries. Being a commissioner is a salaried position, and the amendment states that the commissioners should receive at least 25% of the governor's salary. You can see they voted for themselves more than that. For most of these commissioners, as time went on, this became their only full-time job. Then they went about trying to educate themselves in this process. They invited guest speakers to talk to them. They had people from other states who had commissions and experience with those. They hired advisors. They talked to mapping consultants. They purchased mapping software, and they had a budget of $3.1 million to work with. So the commission hired all these people to support them. You may have seen at one point Edward Woods III. I have to practice saying that name. I stumble over it every time. But he's kind of the face of the commission. He is their communications and outreach director. He's a very vivacious man, very supportive of the commission. He made all their travel arrangements. He made all their media contact arrangements, etc. You might have also heard of Julianne Pestula. She was their general counsel. She resigned late last month, and the commission has decided not to replace her because most of her duties have already been dispensed with. Down below here, you can see that the commission, they were well aware from the very beginning that they would be challenged by lawsuits once they got the maps all approved, and they really put an effort into making sure that they were complying with those criterion. And so they hired a partisan fairness analyst. Dr. Hanley here comes from Harvard. They hired a voting rights active legal counsel. That was Bruce Adelson. They interviewed a lot of mapping consultants, and they ended up with election data services and purchased their mapping services. So with all this support, the commission moved on ahead. They were involved in 72 virtual government presentations. And the goal here was to get the word out that the commission was assembled and what they were to do, and that the amendment required that they seek public input into this process. And we in Michigan are not used to that at all. So they had a real effort to reach out to the public. They attended town hall meetings. They attended interviews that were on television, on the radio. They went to local fairs to reach out to the rural people in Michigan. They held 16 public hearings. Remember, they were only required to have 10, but they had 16 prior to drawing any maps. And it's at those public hearings that people could attend in person or virtually and make a 2-minute pitch to the commission about their community of interest and let them know why they felt that should be kept intact. The commission also participated in some collaborations with these universities listed here, and they held 2 regional meetings in the upper part of the Lower Peninsula. Now, they were pretty successful in their outreach. The commission thought if they got 10,000 comments, they would be successful. Well, look, they exceeded that by a high number. And they had multiple ways for people to communicate with them. Most of the comments came in here on this mapping comment portal. I'll show you an example of this in a couple of slides. All along the way, though, people could communicate with the commission. They could send emails in. They could show up in person at the public hearings. They could attend to those remotely. So they greatly exceeded that number of 10,000, almost reaching up to 30,000. This slide was presented by Edward Woods III at a presentation at the Ford School of Public Policy put forth on January 19th. I attended that, and it's recorded. You can look at that. And so he was very proud of the fact that they had so much resident participation. Now, what else did the commission do? Well, on November 12th, they put together these 15 proposed plans. These are all different types of maps of different kinds here. You can see that the ones with asterisks all are labeled after trees native to Michigan. Those are the collaborative maps. And what that means is that the group, the commission, as a group, at their public meetings, sat down with the mapping software and the mapping consultant and all the comments they'd received and started to draw lines. They didn't always get along, they didn't always agree, but they were successful in coming up with these maps. You also see some that are named after specific commissioners, Zatala, Lang, and Kilo. These were maps submitted by those commissioners. They drew them on their own, and they were submitted before the 45-day public comment period began. So all of these maps were presented to the public, and comments were invited. Now, you could go to the website, and you still can, and see all of this data. Remember, I said that the commission had to show and test their maps in accordance with the criteria. There's a lot of ways to quantitate that. Political scientists don't agree on one way to test partisan fairness or one way to test if a map complies with the Voting Rights Act. There are multiple ways. We have up here all these labels. The commission chose partisan fairness techniques that they knew had already been accepted by state and federal courts. They also compiled all this information to have a nod toward the Voting Rights Act. And this set of columns here, the orange, represents the max voter age population for the different races here. So to read this, you can see that in the Cherry State Senate map, there is a district that has the maximum black voter age population of 44.78%. This lists the maximum amount in a district for a given map. You can see those numbers vary from the 44, they go up to 55, and they drop down to 42%. You have the data also for Asian and Hispanic, and then this is the total minority. We're going to look at these again for each of the maps that were chosen, and so keep these topics in mind. You can also see that these two columns here are predicting the number of seats that would go to the Democrats and the number of seats that would go to the Republicans with that district, a set of districts drawn for the map. That is based on voter previous behavior. So there's absolutely no guarantee those number of seats will be achieved, but previous voter behavior, which is all present in the mapping software, predicts that these will be pretty tight, very, I should say, competitive districts here. Now, after this was published, the commission held their 5 public hearings where, again, people could come and state their support or their displeasure with any of the maps. And then finally, on December 28th, the commission adopted the 3 final maps. They published their report, including the maps, on January 26 of 2022. Now, the amendment states that the maps will become law 60 days following the date of their published report. That would be March 28th, 2022 here, coming up very soon, unless they lose one of the 2 pending lawsuits that's right now before the Michigan Supreme Court, or I should say have been filed. The Michigan Supreme Court could tell them to go back and draw 1 or more of those maps again. Keep in mind, though, it is only the commissioners that can draw a map. That job will never go to anyone else but those commissioners. That is embedded in the amendment, and that is to protect outside interference. So, you can go to the commissioner's website and for every one of the maps, look at all those metrics that they used to devise the map. You can look at the mathematical models that they used to come up with that sheet I showed with all the data on it. And you can go and look at the shape of the map, you can really zoom in on it, etc. Now, you might be wondering over the course of this time what role the League of Women Voters played. Well, they put together a program called People Powered Fair Maps. And that is led by Susan Smith. It's ongoing, and she's the vice president of the League of Women Voters of the state of Michigan. That group held over 30 virtual town halls in the spring of last year. They really focused on informing people and coaching them in terms of the communities of interest. Because again, this is the way individual residents could approach the commission, explain their membership and community of interest, explain why they want their area kept together in a district. Susan also had someone assigned to monitor every single one of the MICRC meetings. Following that, a written report was submitted to her. And the League supported the MICRC's request to the Michigan Supreme Court for an extension in the timeline. If you recall, the census came out months later than anticipated. The amendment had specific dates embedded in it for approval of maps, and the commission felt they were going to be hard-pressed to get to that since they didn't have the data yet to work with. The Michigan Supreme Court did not agree with them, though, and held them to those dates. The League of Women Voters also, through Sue Smith, submitted multiple written and oral comments to the commission. She participated in press conferences and briefings and press releases. And the group organized 8 regional town halls following the proposed maps in the fall of 2021. The League of Women Voters has filed a lawsuit against the commission stating that they claim that the Michigan State House map that was approved is not fair in terms of partisanship. They compare that to maps drawn by Promote the Vote. So they feel that the House map drawn by Promote the Vote is nonpartisan and should be adopted by the commission. We'll have to see what happens with that. Now, of course, The State League couldn't have done any of that work without the support of the local teams. And our team, Washtenaw County, was led by Margaret Leary. As a member of that team, we focused on communities of interest, again, try to get the word out. Some of us met with small groups of people. We made presentations. As a group, we contacted all of these groups here that might align themselves as a community of interest. We explained to them how they would pitch their community of interest to the commission and what they should focus on. We also held a town hall meeting in April of 2021 to further explain the process to people, and then a webinar in the fall of 2021 to explain the proposed maps. In addition to all this work that Margaret's done, she is a named plaintiff in the lawsuit, the League of Women Voters, State of Michigan versus the MICRC. Now, let's get to the maps. This is the congressional map chosen. It's the chestnut map. It received that supermajority. They all did. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 4 independents voted for this map for our congressional map. You'll see that we have 13 congressional districts now in the state of Michigan. Each has a population here, plus or minus 0.5%. So you can go up here to the statistics and the analytics here for this map, and you can see that, for example, the district on this map that has the highest deviation from the population, it deviates by 0.13%, well below the 0.5%. You can also see that given this map, the district that has the highest percent of black voting age voters, or population voting age, in the voting age that are black is 44.7%. You can see that for all the different minorities. One big difference between this map and previous congressional maps for Michigan, you see this whole area here is combined now. The whole Upper Peninsula and the upper portion of the Lower Peninsula are one large region. Previously, there were lines drawn in this direction and this direction, split that up. Now, I mentioned that people could make comments once they saw this district map right on the map. And here's an example of that data. All of these points are comments people have made on this exact map. You can click on the dots and see exactly what people say, where they came from. So they're scattered around here because it's the location of the commenters. The green means that those are favorable comments on this map. The red, unfavorable. And there's some neutral ones in here. There is a high percent of green dots on this map, and you can go to the website and look at the same kind of information for each of the other 2 maps. Now, our state Senate map that's been adopted is the Linden map. It also received the supermajority needed. We have 38 state Senate districts. Each has a population of 265, 193, plus or minus 5%. So a larger range is allowed for the Senate and the House maps. You can see that the map that deviated the highest from that population, or the district that deviated highest, that population is here, 4.78%, below that amount, plus or minus 5%. You can see all the other statistics here as well. And finally, we have the House district map. That was the Hickory map. It's received a lot of support from the commissioners. All but 2 supported this choice. We have 110 districts in the state of Michigan. And of course, you can see the districts are larger up here where the population is less dense, and smaller down here where it is more dense. Each of those fall within this range. You can see from the data up here, and you can see that this map here meets all these criterion, and according to previous voter behavior, again, previous voter behavior, is predicted to have 57 Democratic seats and 53 Republican seats. Now, we all want to know how this affects Washtenaw County. So we're going to zoom in on Washtenaw County for each of those maps. The Congressional District map is shown here. Washtenaw County falls completely within the 6th Congressional District. We also pick up a portion here of Wayne County, and this portion of Wayne County that follows the Huron River watershed. The Huron River watershed made quite an impression at the commissioners' meetings. There was a number of people that requested that the Huron River watershed be considered a community of interest, and it looks like the commissioners listened to that. You can go online and look at all the stats for our district. The state, I'm sorry, I keep moving my cursor on the other map and you're not seeing me. I'll move it over here. The state Senate districts for our county, we have two that cut across Washtenaw County, the 14th and the 15th. Previously, you might remember that we had linkage up toward the north into Livingston County. There was a contingent of people that came and requested that the Jackson-Ann Arbor corridor be considered a community of interest and kept intact, and it looks like the commissioners listened to that. You can see Ann Arbor here is sliced right between the two districts. And if you're wondering where you fall, if you're close to those lines, you can go to their website, type in your address, and figure that out. And the last map here is the house map. Now previously, Washtenaw County here touched 4 different districts. Now we're spread across 7 districts. So the folks in Washtenaw County can influence 7 different house districts. Again, look at Ann Arbor, split up between 4 of those districts. You can go to the website here, just go to the MICRC website and enter your address and you'll find out where you are on the map. Now, we're going to move into the report card portion here. There are a number of ways to assess how successful the commission was. First, we're going to look at metrics here. I mentioned that there's a whole host of ways that political scientists measure maps fitting these different various criteria. So, at the meeting I've already mentioned, January 19th, John Aquia, he is at MSU. He worked with other universities as well on this. And they applied all of the metrics that they used to evaluate the adherence to equal population, for example. All the metrics for Voting Rights Act compliance. The green check marks, and it's nice to see quite a few of those, means that that map met that criterion by all the ways it could be measured. Now you see it in several thumbs up, thumbs down. That means that this map, for example, there's some question, some of those measured criteria were not met for the Voting Rights Act. We see the communities of interest, none of the maps met all the criterion. This, however, is pretty hard to judge because the communities of interest are, there's no database of those. You would have to look to see how well the commissioner listened to the people, community of interest, and so this is pretty hard to assess by any measurement. We have partisan fairness. These 2 maps didn't meet all the criterion the way that's measured. You'll see that on the data that I previously presented, though, the metrics that the commissioners chose, which is in their report, those maps didn't meet those criterion. Now you see some faces here. For John Aquia, I never mentioned these measurements, and when I looked at the report, I don't think they made any effort to measure compliance with counties and cities. And remember, this is 6th on the list of criterion that the amendment states. And so assessing that, I don't know how much sense it makes because the other criteria here take priority. Now, we're looking at all this data here. We can use that to look at litigation as a way of measuring the success or failure of the commission. There have been 3 lawsuits filed against the commission. Group A here is a group of 7 Republicans. They filed in the western part of the state, and they focused on the Congressional Map, and they feel that the Congressional Map does not meet the equal population criteria and that it ignores the communities of interest. You might have heard about the Black Caucus. This group of people in the Detroit area. They focused on all of the maps and state that they did not meet the Voting Rights Act criterion and that they ignore communities of interest. And we have the League of Women Voters suit that focuses on the House map and specifically saying that it does not meet the criterion for partisan fairness. Okay? So I don't know if Margaret has joined us now, but she was going to go through the litigation and let you know where all those stood. Margaret, are you with us?
I am here. I apologize for being late. I was reading a fascinating book and I just got lost in the book.
That's okay.
So actually the first lawsuit that was filed was way back in April of 21. This is the one that Vicki mentioned. The commission needed an extension of time because the census was so late. The census information was supposed to get to them in April, but two things got in the way. One was COVID-19, which really limited the Census Bureau's ability to knock on doors and get information from people directly, but also by several years of confusion created by the administration at the time over, in particular, whether or not there would be a question about this, about whether someone was a citizen on the census. And that ultimately did not happen, but there is some reason to think that people feared that the census takers would somehow find out whether or not they were citizens, and that reduced people's participation. But those are the two main causes for the delay. The commission brought this as what's called an in rem, meaning about a thing, lawsuit. It's not a lawsuit with one party versus another party. However, the Supreme Court denied the request 4-3, 3-4, I mean, and 4 people did not want to take the case because they said it wasn't clear exactly what the controversy was that the commission wanted help with. So that result came out in July after they had had an oral argument. Could you go to the next slide, please, Vicki?
Mm-hmm. I did. Do you see it?
Yep. The next one, I'm not sure this one was on your list, but this one was filed in December by a collection of media organizations, not just print, but TV and radio as well. They filed a lawsuit and demanded the release of letters and memos and an audio recording of a meeting that the commission had with its lawyers. And the purpose of the meeting was to talk about, it became clear once the documents were released, the purpose of the meeting was to discuss possible strategies for the commission to use should they be sued over the Voting Rights Act. The lawyers that the commission hired had told them that this was appropriate to be a confidential meeting because normally, that is out in the real world, when a client gets together with his or her lawyer to talk about litigation, that can be a private meeting. The problem is that the commission is not a private person. The commission is a public group that has extremely high standards for what it has to do to make the public aware of what it is up to. And in fact, that has been taken so far more recently as to mean that the Open Meetings Act does not apply to the commission. The commission has to meet higher standards even than the Open Meetings Act. So those are the reasons that the court found that the commission should release the records. They released 7 memos, I think some correspondence, and the audio file of the closed session, which was in fact discussing the Voting Rights Act. So I'll go to the next one now. And this was filed in early January. The Detroit Caucus, which was a mixture of elected officials who were African American and voters who were African American, and they alleged that the new districts, congressional and state, violated the Voting Rights Act for their areas because they did not provide enough of what are called districts of opportunity, where minority voters have a chance to succeed in electing the person that they choose. And this slide is really good. It shows you that the commission thought that they could have 40% minority voters, but the plaintiffs claimed they needed 50% in their districts so that they could elect the candidate of their choice. And the court dismissed this lawsuit, which means that the court probably believed that the commission had done all right by the African Americans. This was a place where Lisa Handley, the expert from Harvard, was very influential in her ability to assess past elections, precinct by precinct. She can't find out how individual people voted, but she can find out two things that are very helpful. One is which candidates got how many votes, and the other is what the population of a particular precinct is in terms of, as you saw on the chart of measurements, includes African Americans, Hispanic, and Asian. And what she did was to look carefully at the precinct level in the districts that comprise Detroit, and she found that there were enough voters who were not African American that voted for the candidate that the African Americans wanted, that the African Americans could count on enough of those other minority groups voting for the candidate that African Americans wanted, that they could get success in their hope to elect a person of their choice. There's another element in this that never really came out, but I think is important, and that is that the people in those Detroit districts, what was the 14th district, they didn't seem to realize that they had been living for at least 10 and probably 20 years in an unconstitutionally gerrymandered district that was created by what's called packing. You put a huge number of people, in this case African Americans who would mostly vote Democratic, you put them all in one district. You cram as many in as possible. And guess what? There aren't very many of them in the adjacent districts, and they lose the ability to have any influence over those other districts, which is why I'm comfortable personally with the Supreme Court's decision, although you can see it was another close one, 4-3. Okay, we can go on to I guess it's now the third lawsuit. This one was filed later in January, and this is Republicans who filed their lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Michigan, i.e. not in the Michigan Supreme Court. And they made two claims. One was that the maps fragmented communities of interest, which these plaintiffs defined as including the lines for cities, counties, and townships, even though that's the 6th out of the 7 criteria. And the Constitution says shall consider, I think it's you consider these political boundaries, but it's next to the last one. And so that one was dismissed earlier this month. The second one claim was that the districts violate the one person, one vote method. And Vicki has very kindly repeated the information here because they make this claim particularly, I think, about the congressional districts. I know it's just the congressional districts, and they are supposed to have plus or minus 775,179, which means they have to get within 3,876 people of that number. Well, if you look at the complaint that was filed in this suit, the only thing I can find where they really address this directly is a chart that shows the deviation for each district, each congressional district, the deviation within that district from the 775,179. And guess what? None of them add up to 3,800. No one of them is even close to being 3,876. And if you add up all the differences, they don't total that either. So I don't know whether they didn't realize that there's this plus or minus 0.5%, or the other possibility is that I totally misunderstood their argument, that I didn't do a good job of reading it, and I'm incapable of understanding their argument. But I will go back and read that again to see. Oral arguments are going to be held day after tomorrow. Unfortunately, and I've asked several people this question, you can't hear the oral arguments for this district court. You can hear the oral arguments before the Michigan Supreme Court. They're on YouTube, and I believe you can go back and look at them after the fact as well. And by the way, all the commission meetings are on YouTube, and if you want to, you can go back and look at all of those, but it would take you a long, long time. Okay, let's go on to the next case. And this is the League of Women Voters, and Vicki did as good a job as I can in explaining this, that it provides a disproportionate partisan advantage to the Republican Party, specifically just the House of Representatives, the state House map. If you look at the chart of all of the maps that the commission considered, all 15 of them, there is only one that is better than Hickory, and that's the one that was, I think, submitted by Zatella. And they never got around to considering any of the maps that the individual commissioners had submitted because they were rather quickly able to come to agreement about vote on the three that they had all approved. So they didn't need to do that. So we will see what happens with that. And I'm sure it will be covered well in Bridge and the Free Press and the other papers. So did I miss anything, Vicki? Did I?
Nope, you got them all, Margaret.
Okay,
yep.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks. So we'll continue our report card. You mentioned there's a number of ways. So litigation was one way to measure the success or failure of the commission. And we can also compare the progress of Michigan's redistricting commission to those of other states. Each state has the right to determine their own redistricting method, and they fall under one of these three categories. You can see most states use legislator-dominant ways, which means that the legislation redraws the lines after every census. More and more states are going to a commission approach, where a commission is formed and they have the responsibility for drawing the district lines. And then there's a hybrid method that's used by just a few states here. And in that case, the commission advises or works with the legislature. Now you'll see that here we don't total up to 50 states. And that's because 7 states are made of only one district due to their population. But all states have to redistrict in terms of the Senate and the House seats. So there's 14 states that do this process by a commission. and those with asterisks here do that with a commission made of non-politicians. The other ones have politicians on their boards. Now, at the meeting with the School of Public Policy of Ford School, David Daly was one of the presenters, and he compared Michigan to other states that had elected redistricting reforms the same time we did, 2018 to 2020. And David Daly states that Michigan can indeed be a model for redistricting for the nation. And a large part of his argument is comparison to these other states. So we have a list here. Colorado is not there because Colorado was very successful in coming up with redistricting maps that were nonpartisan and considered fair. These other states, though, that put a commission in place failed. Their commissioners failed to produce maps. In some of these states, the state legislators took over. I think it was in Missouri that the legislators just repealed the amendment altogether. And in the state of Virginia, the commission, which was made of half politicians and half non-politicians, divided right along partisan lines and could never come to a consensus. And so in accordance with their amendment, the Virginia State Supreme Court had to step in and assign special masters to design the maps. David also referred to Arizona. Now, Arizona has the longest commission. Their commission has been in place since 2000. But this is a story, he said, to be aware of. Arizona decided to make the assignment of their commissioners be done by this group of people, CACA. That stands for the Commission on Appellate Court Appointments. And when Governor Ducey came into office, and even when he was campaigning in 2014 there, he publicly stated that this commission was his top priority. He went about stacking that commission with Republicans, and now Arizona has a very partisan commission. And so this points to the fact that the way the amendment writes the selection of the commissioners is essential to protect those commissioners from outside interference. Now, we can also look to the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, which is a group of universities working with Princeton. They assess all the maps for all the states every time there is a redistricting effort. And they give them a grade. And these are our 3 maps. And here's our overall grades on those maps, A, B, and B here. They state that Michigan's process was a success story of redistricting. And you might say, okay, I like the A's and the B's. Okay, well, C's, well, that's okay. But what about that F down there? Remember that this column here was 6th in line of criteria, the geographic features. That really meant going along the lines are previously drawn for counties, townships, etc. That was 6th in the list, and on our state house map, it shows that the commissioners really did not abide by those lines at all. But again, the 6th criterion states they may consider those lines. Also, these are rated and weighted differently. Partisan fairness and competitive comes out much more important than geographic features. So that's how we ended up with our A, B, and B rating. We can also look to the media. How did the media judge how the commission did? Well, this was reported in December by the New York Times. Look at the words here. Ungerrymandered, independently drawn, set up a fair fight. Okay? They were very impressed with Michigan's process here. And we can look more locally at Gangwar, which is a publication that for over 100 years has focused on Michigan politics. They have made the Redistricting Commission their newsmaker of 2021. They're very impressed with the process that the commission followed. Now, who more important than the voters to rate the commission? The MICRC commissioned this company here, Gangwar Group, to take 2 voter surveys. One before they started any of their work, and one after the work was done. Now, this was a live operator telephone survey of registered voters. They only have 600 people that they sampled, but this list of measurements here are the terms that voters said in the first survey, before the commissioners did anything, were most important to them. They wanted to make sure the districts were designed by the citizens and not the politicians. They wanted to make sure that they weren't gerrymandered. They wanted to make sure that the Michigan voters had input and not our elected officials, etc. You can go down this list. Now, these percentages are a result of the second telephone survey. And you can see that the commissioner rated fairly well in terms of what the voters know. We can also ask the commissioners themselves how they think things went. You'll have to watch the movie to do that, because the commissioners have a documentary being made of their experience, and they're going to include for the 2030 commission some lessons that they learned. Keep in mind that the amendment requires a new commission be formed every 10 years following the census results. And so this commission will eventually disband. And they're right now in the process of figuring out how to do that. The commissioners recently voted themselves, it was very contentious actually, a 7% raise. To realize that these last months for many of these commissioners, this was their only full-time job. They have scheduled 2 monthly meetings for the entire year of 2022 because they may remain intact until all lawsuits are settled. They're still accepting public comments on their portal. They are, under discussions on how they're going to disband, when they would do that, but also way that they would reconvene. There are 10 years until the next commission comes into place. That our current commissioners could be subject to lawsuits anytime during those 10 years. They have to figure out how they're going to handle that. That is actually not well spelled out in the amendment. So as we get close to 2030, our Secretary of State's office will go through the same process and will put in place 13 new commissioners. And hopefully they will benefit from what this first group of commissioners learned. And this wraps up our presentation. So Margaret and I are happy to see if we can answer any of your questions.
Could I add just a couple quick things?
Sure.
One is in the survey that you talked about, gave a great description of it. One element that I found very compelling in that survey was that 65% of the people that they contacted, 65% of the people who identified as Republicans and 65% of the ones who identified as Democrats preferred the commission over the legislature as the entity to make the decision. And I found that very compelling because really only 61% of the people voted for it. So it means that after they were done with their work, the percentage of people who preferred the commission went up. And the other thing is, and forgive me if I already said this, but this is the second time I've participated in this talk today, and the two events are blurring together in my mind. But I think it's important to understand why this was made a constitutional amendment rather than have an effort to pass a law. Setting aside the fact that there was no hope for this to pass in the present gerrymandered legislature in Michigan, the reason that it was done as a constitutional amendment was to make it impossible for this legislature or any future legislature to change it without the voters approving whatever the change was. And that's why it's so important to do the Promote the Vote 2022 campaign. We have a reminder that we should all sign up for that if we're at all interested in getting the training so that we can go out and get petitions signed. You saw what Voters Not Politicians was able to do to get enough signatures with 4,000 people. Well, we're not 4,000, but every one of us we can't do everything, but we can certainly contribute. So just a pitch for that as well. So that's all I have to say.
Any questions? I would like to ask our speakers, you've given us all these metrics, but considering your affiliation with the League, in general, how do each of you feel this first effort went? Vicki, you can go first.
I was pretty amazed at how well these 13 people got along. You know, they had their clashes, but there were never along party lines, which amazed me. And there were several people on the commission that would rein in the other ones. And I think, especially when you look to the other states and what happened to those folks, I think the commissioner did a pretty good job. What do you think, Margaret?
I agree with that completely. I was amazed at how well they worked together, and I was also really impressed with the people that they hired, which I think is a large reason for their success. Sue Hammersmith, the executive director, was wonderful. Edward Woods was wonderful. Julianne Pastula ran into a little bit of difficulty because she was in a situation where there were two lawyers on the commission, and she, of course, was a lawyer. And it's really hard. I mean, my whole career was spent with lawyers, and it's really hard to find two of them agree on anything. And when she was outnumbered 2-1, it was a challenging situation for her. But Vicki is right. She worked as long as she had to. And if they are sued in the future, and remember, the League's lawsuit against the 2011 gerrymandering didn't even get filed until 2017 and was not completed until 2019. So the chances of a lawsuit coming up along the way are pretty good. And the commission has a bunch of lawyers. One of the preeminent law firms in the country, Baker Hostetler. And the Baker Hostetler lawyer did the oral argument in the Detroit Caucus case, and she did a wonderful job and won the case for the commission. So I think they really did well, and a lot of that is due to the amount of detail that's in the constitutional amendment. I normally don't like a lot of detail in a constitutional amendment for the reason that Nancy Wang stated and that Vicki quoted, that you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And if you put too much detail in there, you can not protect a commission, but you can make it hard for the commission to operate. And I think we've learned a lesson from the Voting Rights Act, voting rights proposition that was passed also in 2018 by an even higher percentage than the commission. I think that was a 63% passage rate. But what is Promote the Vote 2022? It's adding in details that were not in the one we passed in 2018, because we had no way to foresee exactly what could be done with ballot, all the things that are in the Republican supported possible petition to put on the ballot. But anyway, I think the commission did a remarkably wonderful job, and it isn't perfect, but they had to agree on it. And if you want to read something complicated, it's how the commission can resolve a situation where they can't come to agreement on a map. And it is actually something that the commissioners could not, with the help of all their lawyers, could not really determine exactly how it should happen. So it was really wonderful that they didn't have to invoke that. But I think they did a great job, and it was actually quite fun to watch them. You can do it while you're doing something else, which always appeals to me, because a lot of what was going on, you don't really have to listen to all the public comment, but you can, if you want to see what it's like, you can just pick a meeting near the end. Or Vicki, maybe you have a favorite meeting that you could recommend for people to watch. But I think it's quite important to see that they actually did all this work. Now, some of them learned how to draw maps, but not all of them learned how to draw maps. But that's okay, because they had that mapping expert who could, he participated in the meetings when they were drawing the lines, and they would draw lines a certain way. And one of the commissioners would say, well, I think that line should be farther to the west. Well, how much farther, he says, to the west? Well, enough to get in 2,000 more people. And so he would figure out how to do that. So anyway, I see we get more questions, so I will be quiet.
Someone else with a question? Chris has just posted that we're going to talk at our next meeting on expanding our work on dissemination of our 10 things you can do to protect voting rights and democracy.
Well, I just want to say this is wonderful. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was wondering about, they got a lot of criticism of the state house maps. And yet they didn't, I wondered if they weren't they just tired at that point? And they just said, we'll go with this one. Because, and what surprised me too a little bit on one of the slides you showed was that by some partisan measure or other, that map, state house map, leans Democratic, when I know the League of Women Voters suit, and most of the comments said it leans. Anybody explain that, Margaret or Vicki?
Actually, in many of the newspaper articles, it says all these maps lean still Republican. And I'm not quite sure where they're coming up with that, but as I said, there are multiple ways to measure this. So the options that the commission chose don't show they're leaning Republican. They're really, several of them are leaning more Democratic, but they're very competitive districts, so you don't really know how things are going to turn out. But I was kind of surprised at that too, because all the data I'm looking at says many of them are more toward the Democratic group. But
I can see that it would have been really difficult, but with the way geographically Republicans and Democrats tend to be distributed around the state, it would be.
Yeah.
So it has obviously been the case that he's Republican, partly because of gerrymandering and partly because of how people are distributed.
And I want to say something about the mapping software. The mapping software, what they used, and most of them were, as I saw too, they go precinct by precinct. So your precinct collects all kinds of information on the voters, all right? And so you have to realize that gerrymandering's been with us for more than 100 years. Why has it been so bad in the last couple of decades? Well, it's because of all the data that's now available, that you can take a map like that and start to gerrymander it. You can say, okay, I want to group all these people together and these people together, and you have the data to do that. So it was a challenge to the commission to look at the data in a bipartisan way and not approach it as it has been used in the last couple of redistricting cycles.
Can I add to that a little bit? It's true that the amount of detail in the mapping software is gigantic. It's really, really important. However, the real way that Michigan got so badly gerrymandered in 2011 is described in David Daley's book, which Vicki had the actual title, the way it appears on the book. The title of the book is RATF *** KED. And he describes the Republican project that was called Red Map, which identified several states. They were looking forward to the time of the next census, and then they decided to identify states where the legislature was sufficiently up for grabs that with very little money and relatively little effort, they could shift the House of whatever the state's legislature was that was going to do the redistricting to be Republican. And they did that in Michigan, they did it in Pennsylvania, I believe they did it in Wisconsin. They picked states where they thought they could make a difference and have Republicans run the legislature in a state where the legislature was the one that drew the lines. So that was a very deliberate effort, and it was, of course, rewarded with even more sophisticated software. But David Daley's book is what got me so interested in all of this. He's got a whole chapter on Detroit, on what was Michigan's 14th Congressional District, that ran from Detroit up a narrow line that's really about one highway all the way up to Pontiac, thereby capturing almost 90% of the African Americans in the state of Michigan in one congressional district. And you can look at another way that I've used to describe the impact of gerrymandering is to say, look at who won the election in a statewide office. Okay, what is that? President, state senate, 2 people, a governor, attorney general, and secretary of state. All of those in 2020 were won by Democrats. And yet we ended up with a state legislature and a state senate that were clearly, significantly Republican. That's the impact of gerrymandering, I think. So, see, you get me started. I can't stop.
I'm looking forward to the next election under the new maps. Really.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Right.
Well, thank you so very much, Vicki and Margaret. You've done a beautiful job here in helping us understand this process and helping us feel proud of the role of the League in this process.
Mhm. Well, Vicki did it. Vicki did it all. Really, I have to give her credit. She did a huge amount of research and she made beautiful slides, and I just filled in.
Well, Margaret is the one you go to ask for all those questions that you can't
Right.
find answered anywhere else. So,
Yeah.
you know.
There you go. Thank you. Back to you, Chris, to say goodnight.
Yeah, so we will continue on with protecting democracy and our 10 things at our next meeting, but being informed about gerrymandering and redistricting and what we've accomplished is an important piece of that picture. Thank you all for coming here. Thank you, Vicki and Margaret, and thank you, Sue, for such meaningful work that we're all doing together. We'll see you next month on the second Monday of the month, and thank you for supporting our work.